This is In the Trenches, broadcast 63.
Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another broadcast of In the Trenches. I'm very excited to have on today's call a good friend of mine, Tyson Adams. And Tyson is the co-founder of Zuddha Organic and the founder of Jhai Coffeehouse. And in both businesses, Tyson is combining his passion both for philanthropy and entrepreneurship to create some really terrific results, including starting several education and clean water projects in Laos for the past 3 years. And he's actually getting ready to go back to Laos to continue these initiatives, which is pretty crazy. And we'll dig into that during the interview. But yeah, I just want to say, Tyson, thank you so much for being on the call with us today.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself. I definitely want to dig into both Zuddha and Jhai, but let's take us back a little bit. Where are you from, and then what led you to kind of pursuing entrepreneurship and specifically kind of social entrepreneurship, which I guess this might be labeled as?
Yeah, so my journey goes back. I'm from Seattle. I went to the University of Washington, and then I actually left on a one-way plane ticket to Southeast Asia 8 years ago, and had really no intention of coming back for a year. But I ended up only staying for 4 months because this concept of creating a social coffee business actually came of that trip. So in those first 4 months, I did Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And really the story is an interesting one because even now today when I reflect on it, it actually all stemmed from a dream that I had where I was actually sitting on a cabana overlooking the Mekong River, and I had a cup of coffee. Actually, it was an espresso. And after it wore off, I fell asleep and I woke up and I had this crazy idea of importing Lao coffee to America and selling it. And then providing education support and education supplies in the form of books back to the coffee growing community and specifically the children in the schools that are growing the coffee. So I did it, and that's kind of the beginning of my year adventure with all of these projects.
Okay, so what year was that you actually did the first kind of Southeast Asian tour?
Let's see. So it's 2015, so it would have been about 2008 going into 2009.
Cool. And so you did that for 4 months. You came back. You're like, I have this idea. And then now what?
Yeah. So I basically just rented my motorbike and drove into the jungle and met a community of coffee farmers that there was only one guy that spoke English, got some coffee samples, brought it back to America. And then I decided I was going to do something with it. So in my dream, I actually had seen this vision of building a coffee stand where you would drive up and you would buy coffee, but you would also be watching a digital video of that particular village and the community, and you would know that your purchase would be supporting them. But when I got back to Seattle, I realized that not only is it quite expensive to start a coffee stand and build one, but also to find the property to pay rent to have that. So I decided on a very different model, which was a coffee fundraising model, where I basically did coffee fundraisers for schools, NGOs, and organizations needing to fundraise. And so I would basically do their own label. So let's say a high school basketball team would get their own coffee, or their own high school, let's say basketball team label. We would also, so we would sell the coffee to them for $10, and then they would sell it for $20. So they would make $10 a bag, and then we would take $1 of profits and then buy a book and put it back into circulation in those communities over in Laos. So that was kind of the beginning of everything.
Cool. So just for my own sake, because I'm curious about this, how you actually did this little piece of it. So would you call this kind of like a white labeling type thing, or how did, like from a practical standpoint of you imported and then so how did that work from a logistics standpoint too?
Yeah, it was similar to a white label. So basically, we all, all these schools, they are fundraising and they need new fundraisers. And most of the fundraisers are, quite boring or, very conventional. So what I decided to do is just to say, okay, I got a great graphic designer. We'll make a beautiful coffee label for you. Go sell that coffee into your own community, but just know that by using us, your fundraiser, instead of magazines or some other company, you're also supporting this community back in Laos. And so then I would take $1 out of our profits and put it back into the community by buying books, if that's more
cool.
Clear.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you started, and how long did you do this for before it kind of evolved to, I guess, more of what it is today, where it's actually like, you're growing in Laos, you're living there, you built a coffee shop. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, so the transition was basically running that and completing 50 fundraisers over a course of about a year, putting 5,000 books into circulation, and then forming a nonprofit during that time, because I saw that there were all these other issues that were happening centered around clean water and hygiene. It happens to be Lao that diarrhea and pneumonia are number 1 and number 2 killers of Lao children. So I started to basically notice that books were not really as essential as basic healthcare related provisions. And so by forming that nonprofit, I was able to start to address some of these other issues, which was the water specifically. And so on, I think, my 3rd trip, I was able to raise, I think at the time it was pretty cheap. It was around $1,200 to put in our first clean water well. And basically from that point forward, we kind of transitioned into doing clean water and hygiene programs instead of doing books, because in Lao culture, the books weren't being utilized as well. They weren't being necessarily respected, and therefore it was a little bit of a situation where there was wasted aid going into the community because they just didn't know how to implement them into their school systems because it's just so foreign to them. But the clean water and the hygiene related programs started to really show that they were being, well utilized, and we were able to get the communities as well to co-invest 15% into the projects themselves. So that creates sustainability, creates community involvement, and then they also manage the implementation of those wells. And so that's kind of when I thought to myself, okay, wow, this is really moving forward fast. And I applied. There's a community called the Misfits, and they're kind of a mobile consulting firm, and they put out this contest, which was, what would be your dream, sort of dream kind of creation, and we're going to fund one of these operations by building you a website and helping you launch it. And so I applied to that contest, which was about 3 years ago, and I won, and it was essentially a $50,000 consulting prize where they basically helped me jumpstart this idea I had in my mind, which is called Jhai Coffeehouse, which Jhai Coffeehouse is really, to define it, it's the world's first completely philanthropic coffee roaster. So we educate the coffee farmers, tourists flow through, we serve them roasted coffee and food, and then we reinvest all the profits of the cafe back into clean water wells and hygiene programs in those communities. So that's kind of how that transition happened over time.
Yeah, and that's awesome. AJ was one of the first guys I had on In the Trenches. In fact, he's the first episode, the first interviewee for In the Trenches. So it's awesome to talk to you about this, because I remember when he was holding that kind of that scholarship and getting these requests. And I remember seeing yours come through and thinking that was really cool. And then to see it actually go all the way, which I feel like it seems like that's pretty rare, and then to actually succeed and still be operational is incredible. And then doing it in another country, in a third world country, that's, I've been to Laos, and the infrastructure isn't maybe the greatest. There's so many difficulties. I just love seeing that. So tell me a little bit about like the logistics of going there and starting a business. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so in order to set up a cafe, we decided to crowdfund it. So I set up a Indiegogo and was able to raise $15,000 in 30 days, which was really the money necessary to go to Pakistan, where I had developed these relationships over a few years, and rent basically an old house that was right in the center of town, renovate it into basically a beautiful art space is kind of how I see it. It's a little beautiful abode in the middle of the jungle, and when tourists flow through there, they're often shocked that there's this really cool little funky cafe where they can hang out and use the internet and listen to good music and drink amazing coffee in the middle of the jungle. And it's become really kind of this sort of hub. And obviously lots of sacrifices had to have, or were basically giving up sort of my life in Seattle. But of course, now looking back on it, it was all worth it, and it's still rolling. So.
Yeah. So during those times, like the way you talk about it, I almost think like, oh, this doesn't sound too bad. Like I should just go start something and in another country and enjoy my life doing that. But I believe that there were some hardships. Can you tell us anything about maybe some of the ups and downs of going through this process?
Yeah, I kind of skipped right over those, but
you don't have to dwell on them, but maybe a little a little idea of kind of some of the challenges that come hand in hand with trying to do something like this that's important and again kind of scary for people. But I think it's important to know some of the things that could possibly like where the challenges were, where the struggles were.
Yeah, I kind of live by this quote. It's a Krishnamurti quote, and I love it. And it is the quote: "One is never afraid of the unknown. One is afraid of the known coming to an end." And the reason why that quote speaks so true to me is that often we think about moving to a foreign country or starting a business, whether that's abroad or even in here in America. And that's what we think is the scary thing, but really it's not. It's the letting go of your old, customs and cultures and ways and family and friends. And so I think that, to answer your question, the hardest thing is when you head over to this remote place in the middle of the jungle and you really don't have any Western community that's there that is permanent friends. You have to deal with, letting go of what your normal ways are, and you have to let go of your community. And I think that's the hardest thing. Your eating habits, your sleeping habits, your what you think is normal, what society projects on you as what you should be doing at your particular age. And I think that those are the hardest parts of that is, accepting this new journey that you feel a calling for, that really society doesn't know how to handle that sort of thing. I mean, a lot of people are inspired by it, but a lot of people also just can't even fathom doing that. So I think that was one thing. And then as far as just the practical things on the ground, we had a couple dogs and a cat that died of rabies. That was emotionally a very, very stressful time. We had people that have stolen from us, workers that have stolen from us. I've seen lots of animals and even people that have died. And that's really a struggle because you're just not around that in Western culture. You can be very far removed from it. And so, there's a lot of ups and downs that the third world shows you that you have to get used to over time. It's not for everybody, for sure.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. Like what, when these things some of these things go wrong that are out of your control, how do you move on from that? Like what's your motto, what's your philosophy, and how do you keep moving?
I'm a fairly vulnerable person, and one of the ways in which I've healed from a lot of this struggle is being vulnerable through social media, being vulnerable with my community, and realizing that they're here for me and that they're supporting regardless of whether or not they're very far away. And then for me, I don't let things sort of boil up and stay inside. I'm pretty emotionally vulnerable kind of guy in that way as well, in sort of letting emotion flow through me in the moment, and therefore we just push those emotions down. But you really have to kind of live very raw when you're over there on that side of the world.
Yeah, definitely. So what, you start this, it seems like a pretty again, every big major project, everything that's important. I think when you look at it from the outside and you look at the final product or whatever the current iteration is, it seems kind of overwhelming. And I know you just take it a day at a time, but then you get to this point where it seems like it's sustainable. It seems like things are going pretty well. And then you go and you start another organization, another company. So tell me about Zuddha and why you did that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that has happened over the last 8 years is that I've gained a lot of creative skills, whether that's building websites or consulting for companies who are running all kinds of different programs. And so I got really well-rounded because when you're living very frugally, you start to have to do everything on your own or get creative in the way in which you do work trades. So I developed enough skills where I felt like I had a very rounded entrepreneurial look at ways that I could create, an income for myself where I wasn't trading hours for dollars, because sitting behind a desk just doesn't work for me. I always explain to people that for the last 8 years, I've been, very time rich, but very financially poor. But in that process, it's helped me to understand what I am passionate about, and it's helped me to define and develop my skills that have now allowed me to set myself up for this, this new venture. So the reason why it all began is that I've always been very curious. I listened to Pat Flynn's, Smart Passive Income blog for a number of years, and I've always been curious about developing passive income streams so that I could live a flexible life where I didn't necessarily need to be dependent on a job. And so what ended up happening is that my first little project was I just wrote an ebook on the health benefits of coconut oil, because I experienced coconut oil a lot over in Thailand. Really started to grow to like it, and it didn't do real well, but it basically produces about $1,000 a year for me, which is passive, and of course that's not a lot, but I sell the book for $1 or for $2.50. So the reality is that I was trying to dabble in passive income, over the course of trying to live this entrepreneurial journey in Laos. And then I realized that physical products are first and foremost where you can make the most money. But second of all, I was in Bangkok and stumbled into a grocery store and found one of the most exquisite, beautiful, and top-end coconut oils that exists in the world. In fact, it likely is the best quality. So I thought to myself, okay, well, we have this huge organization in America called Amazon, and now they're global and they're doing very well, and they create this amazing platform to get, consumables and grocery products out to people, at their doorsteps now. And I started looking into it and realizing that, the number one selling coconut oil on Amazon sells 800 jars a day, and calculating that out by how much profit they're making per jar, they're probably doing over $1.5 million in profit, per year. And so I looked at that and said, okay, well, even if I have a small piece of that, that's going to generate enough money for me to live day to day without needing to collect a paycheck. So that's when I just started to become immersed in Amazon fulfillment and Amazon business. And I've been basically studying it for 2 years. And now, I'm about a month or two from launching that business, which is really exciting.
Awesome. Excuse me. So tell me a little bit about your plans then. How are you preparing then for that launch? Like, what are your both the plans and then also your goals? Like, what do you want to see happen in the next 6 to 12 months with this? And then, maybe if you go further in the future, like, what are your ultimate objectives with this company and then with Jhai and everything else you're doing?
Yeah. So, right now we're running a crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo. The goal is 10,000, and we're now halfway in, and we're at 70% of the goal, so we're right around $7,000. And really, the reason why we chose to crowdfund it was because once we crowdfund it and we get product out to these backers, we have a couple hundred backers. Those are our Amazon reviews. So then we can transition those people directly into fulfilling via Amazon, have them leave us a review. And, as soon as we get to the first page of Amazon, which is around 300 or 400 reviews, then we'll be selling around 300 jars a day. And so you're looking at roughly making around $1,500 a day if we can get to the first page of Amazon. If you just launch into the Amazon platform, it's a slower process of getting reviews because you start at the bottom. But if you launch with a bang and you launch with a huge amount of reviews, then you can basically get to the top fast. And then from there, you can grow pretty rapidly and kind of establish your place in that market. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of why we chose to crowdfund. And then, of course, there's also the sort of the brand building and the social media elements that go into that, building out the Facebook, the Instagram, the Twitter. Then you have a community that's telling your story for you. You get, one really important person or celebrity that tries it and they post about it, and you can essentially accelerate very quickly. So that's why building out the sort of social media and crowdfunding platform was our choice. And then, as far as like your second part of your question, how does that relate into to Jhai? I think that really the goal for me is just utilizing, it's not to go make a bunch of money, but really it's to be completely self-sufficient and to be capable of doing whatever. If I want to go, for example, like Charity Water, they just buy water rigs in Africa and they just start rolling around into villages and drilling. If I had $25,000 in my bank account tomorrow, I could do it, and I could hire a crew, and I could essentially be a mobile drilling, operation. And there's a lot of flexibility to do these types of things. And I think that, when you're dealing with, for example, when you're a nonprofit and you're going for grants, or if you're a social business or whatever, you always have responsibility to, whatever the grant agenda is or the people that are dishing out that money. And I think that that's been wonderful because we've done some amazing things through our partner that has funded some of our programs. But at the same time, I also want the flexibility to just be able to try things on my own without having any responsibility to an outcome, just to see if it will work. So that's why I really want to, build passive income.
That's awesome. Very cool. And so where can people actually reach out to connect with you and actually support this this crowdfunding campaign right now? And how long is it going for?
We have 13 or 14 days left. And our URL actually redirects directly to the campaign. And so you can find us just by going to our URL, which is Zuddha.organic. And you spell Zuddha Zuddha, and then .organic is a verified USDA organic extension.
Perfect. Yeah, I just took some notes on there. We'll make sure that's linked up in the show notes, and this should go live pretty soon. So when people are listening to this, definitely check it out. Go check out Zuddha Organic. Anyway, no matter what, but definitely check it out if you want to get involved in that crowdfunding campaign. And I'm looking forward to supporting it myself after this call. But beyond that, Tyson, tell me any bits of advice for somebody maybe who hears your story, is really compelled by it, loves the idea of the social entrepreneurship aspect of what you're doing. Any piece of advice for him or her?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that we're a culture that asks for permission a lot, and we don't even realize that we do it. We're constantly apologizing for our behaviors and asking our parents and friends and family and society whether or not we can go start these businesses and take these trips. And I think that the most important thing that I've learned is that you're going to disappoint society and your family and your friends to start an entrepreneurial venture and or travel. However, if you feel the calling for it, make it happen, but don't ask for permission, because there's always going to be roadblocks if you do it.
Yep, I love that. Curious, that was going to be my last question, but I'm just curious now. Have you ever gotten asked, like, when are you going to get a real job? And I ask because I've gotten that a couple times from my dad, who I feel like, at this point, I feel like I've actually done a good job of actually building something legitimate and it's thriving and growing. And I still get that question to like go get a conventional job, which it cracks me up, and I appreciate it because I know where he's coming from. But I'm just curious if you've ever had something like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Similarly, I mean, my dad, he also is an entrepreneur, and he would, of course, love for me to take over his business. And at this stage, he realizes that that's not my passion, and that I'm going to follow my passion. But I have gotten that from, friends and family and from strangers. And it's always one of those things where when they start to understand that I'm doing what makes me passionate, so then they kind of back off on it, regardless of the financial ebbs and flows of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, Tyson, I really appreciate having you on, man. It's always great talking to you. I'm very excited for what you're working on, and I hope people who are listening to this, I know they'll enjoy it. And if you guys do enjoy listening to this, go ahead and check out Zuddha.organic. And if you are in Southeast Asia, go swing by Jhai Coffeehouse. I know I missed it last time. It wasn't in our route, but I hope to get there in the next couple of years on our next trip to Southeast Asia. So, Tyson, again, thank you so much for being on the call with us today.
Yeah, thank you as well, Tom. Appreciate it.
And that wraps up another broadcast of In the Trenches. If you'd like to check out the show notes, just head over to tommorkus.com/podcast, where you'll find the latest broadcast. And if you enjoyed today's broadcast, please do me a favor and leave a rating and review on iTunes. That's the fastest, simplest, easiest way to support my creative work, and it would really mean a lot to me. As always, this is Tom Morkus, and if you're listening to this, you are the resistance.